Hi, you're watching Bread and Roses, a weekly political social magazine that's broadcast in Persian and English via New Channel TV. I'm Maryam Namazie.
And I'm Fariborz Pooya. In this week's programme, we'll be discussing the electoral victory of Syriza, the left-wing party in Greece. We'll interview James Bloodworth, the editor of the influential internet magazine Left Foot Forward.
In Shocking News of the Week, we'll be talking about the heinous hacking to death of the secularist and atheist Avijit Roy in Bangladesh.
And in the crazy Fatwa of the week, we'll be discussing the recent Fatwa by Saudi cleric who has declared Earth does not spin.
Who knew? And in the great news of the week, today we will be talking about the wonderful protests in defense of women's rights. And how is that panning out? Men are wearing miniskirts. Stay with us. Syriza's victory in Greece is a triumph against austerity measures that has brought with it great hardship, including 26% unemployment. The bailout of Greek banks by the Troika, the European Union, the IMF and the European Central Bank in 2010 meant that the Greek government was granted 240 billion euros on the condition it implemented a brutal austerity program. What I find really interesting about this whole thing is that here banks have been bailed out, we have to pay for it, people have to pay for it. And even though some of those very banks are now making incredible amounts of profit, we're not getting reimbursed. And so in a sense, when you look at the situation, you see how the whole system is stacked up against people and in favor of the ruling elite.
And also the whole really a minority. It seems, to me, when you observe the whole sort of changes that is taking place both in the financial market, banking system and the sort of, the whole capitalist system that is taken over every corner of the world, you'll see that more and more there is this absurd sort of situation that you have a small institution and mostly banks who are constantly driving the whole, every corner of the globe with the system. But at the same time, you see great hardship for people. And most of the institutions, including the governments everywhere now, they are in some sort of cahoot. The laws, legislation, even when you read newspapers, you have a look at everything is designed around the interest of the banking system and the that this is sort of, it poses the question, is this the best that people could have in the 21st century?
Clearly what you're seeing is that they're cutting back on everything from unemployment benefits, retirement benefits, schools, hospitals, shutting down, libraries, people are losing their jobs left, right and center. And Oxfam just recently did a study where they showed that the 1% in the coming year will have the same wealth as 99% of the population. And this wealth has risen greatly since the banking crisis.
And I think part of that is to the hold and the grip they have on the whole media and sort of encouraging right-wing politics as well. They're very linked with austerity. The growth of right-wing is all designed, for me. It's not a great conspiracy, but you could see the influence of the media and the banking system on the growth of the right-wing political parties, and we'll see the result of that in rise of the Islamists, rise of the religious right, and also right-wing groups like UKIP, Le Pen in France, and others in Northern European countries, I think.
Yeah, in a sense, when I look at the media coverage of Syriza's victory, which has given so much hope to people everywhere. I know it's limited in the sense that it's part of parliamentary democracy. There's only so far that it can go within the system, but nonetheless, it's given great amounts of hope. And when I look at the attack that it's facing, you sometimes think, how are they ever going to manage to do what they want to do, given the sort of attack, all-out attack from the media and from governments?
And it seems that everybody's trying to strangle this movement. And that's one of the features of the situation that we have. The great question remains, I think.
It does remind me sometimes when I look at this sort of attack against Syriza, the attack that was done against, the revolutions in Iran or in the Arab Spring. Obviously, this is very different from a revolutionary movement, but that same sort of attack and making it seem that it's impossible, because I think very often they do want to say that other than this system where you pay for their gain, there is no other alternative. And I think that's why you do see this sort of all-out attack. They don't want to give the impression that anything else is possible. Let's now listen to some interesting comments that James Bloodworth had on this issue, and we'll be back to discuss it further. Don't go away. Hi James, welcome to our program. I wanted to ask you about Syriza's rise to power and what the conditions were in Greece that helped that triumph.
Well, if we go back to the 2008 global financial crash, the response on the part of most European governments to that crash has been programs of austerity. So that's meant big cuts to public services and the like. In Greece, this was taken much further. And many of the cuts there were seen as even deeper, and this related to Greece having a much bigger debt than many other European countries. So if we fast forwards a few years, the result of this austerity program has been around 25% of the labour force in Greece are now unemployed. Greece has lost around a quarter of its GDP, and as a result, the debt, which the austerity program was initially brought in to pay down, the debt has spiralled, and this is obviously affected Greek politics, and the Greek people were fed up with governments that were just planning to implement even more austerity that wasn't working, and on the back of this, Syriza, who've promised to roll back austerity, have come into power.
I mean, do you think that it's likely that they can succeed, given that there's this huge propaganda machinery that's working full force against them?
I think it will be very difficult for them to succeed. I certainly still think that they will be able to make some modest gains. I think there's no appetite for further austerity in Greece. I think all the evidence suggests that austerity hasn't worked in Greece. In fact, it's made things much worse. If Syriza had come to power a few years ago, I think they might have stood a better chance of getting a full programme through, because now the European political leaders such as Angela Merkel, for example, there's more of a willingness to let Greece leave the Eurozone, because it wouldn't be the disaster which it might have been a few years ago. There's more liquidity, for example, in European banks. So that gives leaders such as Angela Merkel and the so-called Troika, it gives them a much stronger hand when dealing with Greece. And as we've seen this week, Greek leaders have watered down their programmes somewhat on the back of negotiations with the European Union.
What are the chances of this happening elsewhere, given that austerity is causing havoc everywhere, not just in Greece?
I think it's difficult, especially in the UK. Lots of the reaction to austerity has been on the right rather than the left. So in the UK, you've seen UKIP has won success on the back of austerity. In France, it's been the Front National. But Syriza's unique, and there's also Spain, I would say. The Podemos movement, there's a chance of them coming into government in Spain. But unfortunately, much like the 1930s actually, much of the response to austerity in terms of politics has been on the nationalist right rather than the socialist left.
And why is that? Why do you think that is?
I think it's partly because the right-wing politicians have an easier job. It's very easy for them. Their messages are very simple. It's the fault of the immigrants. It's the fault of kind of marginalised groups in society. It's a very simple, very crude message. Whereas I think on the left, it's much harder for us sometimes to articulate how exactly we would like to change society, especially since, for example, 100 years ago, people would make a socialistic argument or a communist argument, whereas today, because of what happened in Russia, to put it very simply, more people find some of those arguments more difficult to make.
I mean, one of the things is that, an important aspect of helping the people in Greece is supporting them, showing them solidarity. I think that's quite key. How can we do that internationally? How can we support the people of Greece?
I think partly by example. So to put things the other way around, we show solidarity to Greeks, but they're also setting the example. They're showing us that we don't have to. accept government-imposed austerity cuts to our public services. And you can't, to use the cliche that a better world is possible, we don't have to simply accept the diktats of European politicians and European bankers. There is another way to do things.
No, what's amazing is when you look at this, I mean, the banking crisis, the austerity measures are taken because the banks were saved basically at our expense. But when they make a profit, we don't get any of it. And it just seems like the whole system is stacked up against people. And part of the reason why people are so disillusioned with politics and the process as well seems to be because of that.
Yes, definitely. And the crisis, what was a global banking crisis, has been reframed across Europe as a crisis of individual governments spending too much on things like public services. So very much in Britain, we've had a similar argument coming from the right that the recession was caused by the previous Labour government spending too much money on things like pensions, on benefits, and public services. Whereas really, it's a crisis of a lack of regulation of financial institutions that's caused this crisis, and this is really unfortunate. And we on the left must take some of the blame for that. When the crisis initially hit in 2008, 2009, for not being clear and strong enough in our arguments that this is a crisis of capitalism rather than a crisis of social democracy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The thing that always gets me is that, when you can take any example, medicine is a very good example. When they do research for new medicine, which is hugely important, we pay for it out of our taxes, out of our pockets. But when a medicine is discovered, it becomes the private property of a company. And a lot of people die because they don't have access to the medicine. If you remember, like the medicine that was created to combat AIDS and HIV. And this is the exact same thing. The banks are bailed out. We have to pay for it. They make profits. We still have to pay for it. It is sort of, when you talk about the 99% versus the 1%, it's clear as daylight. In every aspect of our lives, you can see it.
Yeah, and the question is change possible? Is it possible to have a system that it genuinely runs for the benefit of the society as a whole? And I think one of the factors that made Greece different from everywhere else was the genuine popular movement that people have come and said, the only thing they said, no, we do not accept these austerity. This is unacceptable, inhuman. And Syriza leader referred to humanitarian crisis, which was clearly as a result of the austerity programs that banks and International Monetary Fund and European Central Bank
and I think
designed.
that's really the crux of the issue, is that even if it doesn't go as far as it wants to, well, there are limitations within the system, but even so, the hope that it brings is not something that can be looked at unfavorably. It's important, isn't it?
I agree, and I think that's a great starting point, and we need to have that. People need to have an influence on what's going on. The next step is, what else can we do? Can we arrange it within the current system, or do we need to change some fundamental issues within the banking and the production system?
Yeah, I think James also talked about that, the fact that there are limitations within the system, and the reality of the matter is that within this system, is it really possible to have fundamental change? I think not. That's why I'm a socialist. And I do think that, in a sense, what this hope shows that the demand for socialism, the demand for justice, and equality, not just before the law, but economically, socially, politically, in all aspects of people's life, is a fundamental desire of people everywhere.
In this week's shocking news, we've heard the murder of the atheist and writer Avijit Roy in Dhaka in Bangladesh.
Yeah. I mean, the horrendous thing is that they were returning from a book festival, and I think he had just come there for a visit, just for that festival, and some Islamist attacked him and his wife, hacked him to death, and his wife is also really seriously wounded and in hospital right now. She's lost a finger in the attack.
Yes, and I think we'll see this sort of type of attack on the secularists, on free thinkers, on scientists, day in, day out by the Islamists. How many more? When the world has got to sort of say stop, this needs to stop, and the Islamic movement and Islamist movement and religious movement need to be held accountable for this. And I promise you, very quickly you'll see people who support this movement, they try to excuse and justify that.
I mean, just recently in The Guardian, they've already said that, Avijit Roy he went too far in criticizing Islam. The thing that Guardian and these other apologists for Islamists need to understand is it doesn't matter how far you go, you have the right to speak. You mustn't be killed for what you say. How dare you even say that someone's gone too far after they've been slaughtered in this way?
I think the murder of Avijit Roy needs to be condemned by everybody, and I think the Bangladeshi government should be put under huge pressure to bring the murderers to justice.
Because I mean, the fact
and also to make sure that the Islamist movement who is responsible for this, not only the individuals but the whole movement.
But also they have to arrest the perpetrators. I mean, he's had many death threats against him, so they should have been more careful. And I mean, the thing is, you've got to see the links. It's not just Avijit Roy. There were others who've been killed, other atheists and secularist bloggers in Bangladesh who've been killed, and sometimes the Bangladeshi governments arrested them rather than arresting the perpetrators.
And then we'll see that happening currently in Saudi Arabia. A 21-year-old is going to be beheaded because he's an atheist.
Yeah. You've got the 20-year-old in Saudi Arabia who is threatened with beheading because he's an atheist. You've got Salman Nassim, who we spoke about last week, who has been charged with enmity against God. We still don't know if he's been executed or not. I mean, this is what the Islamist movement does to anyone who challenges it, who decides to criticize Islam or Islamism, and who thinks freely. And we need to stand with the free thinkers unequivocally, without any ifs or buts. In this week's Insane Fatwa, it's again from our beloved Saudi Arabia, and you've got this time a cleric. His name is Sheikh Bandar al-Khaybari, and he insists that the world is stationary. And he proves this because he has all this scientific knowledge behind him, that if you get on a plane in Riyadh and you fly to China, if the earth spun, then you would never get there.
This called empirical evidence, where he's proven to you, he's got evidence. So
that's
really, that's as far as it goes. It doesn't matter about the science. It doesn't matter unless poor Galileo.
I know, honestly, he must be turning in his grave.
The rest of humanity. The rest of humanity. This guy is on one side. I think it's crazy that you'll see this. How the whole system in Saudi Arabia and where religion is dominant and in power, they actually take these guys seriously. And the fact that we hear about this, it's publicized widely in the Saudi media, and the camera is there, is rolling, and they interview these guys. And it's hilarious that in Saudi Arabia you'll see these type of people day in, day out on TV, and they churn out these, shall
rubbish.
We say, science?
Yes, pseudoscience,
Yes.
non-science.
Yes.
And what's interesting is it's not only him that said it, there's a couple of clerics that have said it, and you've also got another cleric, Mustafa Ben Ali, who said, for your information, the official Sharia-compliant opinion is that the earth does not spin. So there you have it, folks. The earth does not spin, and you will know if you only thought about it when you get on a plane and go to China. As you know, we're bringing you good news every week, and in this week it's about the wonderful protests in defense of women's rights in Turkey. You've got mass protests in Turkey and Azerbaijan in opposition to the heinous murder and burning of a young student in Turkey. who was threatened with rape first, and when she tried to resist, she was killed. You've got huge amounts of people coming out in protest, and also, interestingly, a lot of men have come out wearing miniskirts. And the idea behind it is that there were some who were saying, well, if women dress this way, then they should expect to be raped. And we hear this all the time when it comes to these sorts of issues. And men have come out and said, wearing a miniskirt should not be any reason for raping someone.
I mean, this is great. I mean, the resistance, I think it's very good. Can I just say this is not the first time? About 2 years ago in Kurdistan, the same thing happened. A lot of men started wearing women's clothes in protest and support of women's rights. And
you did too, didn't you?
I did it as well.
Yeah, we'll show a picture on the screen for you so you can have a good laugh. But that was interesting too, because what happened is the Iranian regime took people who they consider criminals, on behind trucks around the city as a way of embarrassing them. And in addition to doing that, they dress up the so-called criminals in women's clothing, because they say that's the worst sort of debasement and humiliation. And in response, a lot of men came out and wore women's clothing and said that being a woman has nothing to do with humiliation. And so that was another form of resistance that we saw. Now, in this one, in Turkey, just to give you a couple of statistics, you've got 1,400% increase of murder rate of women in Turkey between 2002 and 2009. And an estimated 28,000 women were assaulted in 2013 alone. And people who've come out, the hashtag was, that we will mourn for Aslan is the girl's name, and instead they were saying we will wear miniskirts in commemoration of Aslan, which is great. And there was another hashtag which said, we're not mourning, but we are rebelling.
And I think it's interesting that everywhere in Middle East, North Africa, there is great resistance to the Islamists and the ruling Islamic groups and reactionary forces, and that's a good news for, I think, everybody to focus on.
Yeah, and I mean, it goes back to this whole issue of us talking about how, so much of these things are universal, even though you've got people talking about cultural relativism, saying that people in certain parts of the world, and even in so-called communities here in Europe, don't deserve the same rights because they're different. Here we see in these sorts of protests, of which there are many, that in fact these are hugely universal and human demands. We hope you enjoyed this week's program as we enjoy making them for you. Do tell us what you think about it. Give us your comments, write to us, tweet us, Facebook us, you can call us. We love to listen to any suggestions you might have, and also ideas for future programs and comments on the issues that we've raised. Before we go, we do want to tell you about a new Patreon fundraising campaign that we've started. You'll see the link at the bottom of the screen, and it's basically asking people to help us on a weekly basis so that we can continue bringing you this wonderful, corrupt and immoral program, as the Iranian regime calls it, to you in Iran and people everywhere. So do keep helping us and supporting us, and tell your family and friends about us as well.
So from Maryam, Namazie and myself, until next week, have a good week.
Hi, I'm Maryam Namazie.
And I'm Fariborz Pooya.
We're hosting a program called Bread and Roses. It's a weekly program that's broadcast in Persian and English in the Middle East and North Africa, primarily Iran as well. And it's also shown on YouTube internationally.
And we've been doing this since last May. We're coming up to our year's anniversary, and we've had quite a lot of fun making these videos. We
discuss taboo-breaking, free-thinking ideas. The Islamic regime of Iran has called us immoral and corrupt.
And that's why you need to support us. We are the alternative voice in Middle East and North Africa.
Of corruption and immorality. So do support us. Here's a short video from Patreon that explains how you can help us with even just $1 a week. That's nothing. Support us.
Patreon lets fans become patrons of their favorite artists and content creators. It's different than Kickstarter because it's not about one big project that requires lots of funding. It's more for bloggers or YouTubers or webcomics, anyone who creates on a regular basis. Here's how it works. When you become a patron, you're agreeing to give an artist a tip of an amount you set every time they release a piece of content, whether it's a new song, a video, or a recipe. You can set a monthly maximum to make sure that you're always within your budget. Choose an amount, enter your payment information, and you're done. Becoming a patron allows you to view and post in the artist's stream, and in exchange for your support, artists offer additional patron packages, which might include monthly Google Hangouts, music production tutorials, pre-sale concert tickets, or anything they can offer as a way to say thanks. Patreon, empowering a new generation of content creators.